Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, I just decided to follow up on some requests I've gotten in various video comments and some emails I've received over the years where people have been asking me to delve into class modules. And I think more specifically, a lot of people were interested in subclassing forms or reports. And so I basically took my previous video, which was how to create buttons to change the default saving behavior of Access and make it, behave more like every other program out there and only save changes if you press the save button. So not save it all the time. And, so I had here, you can come and take a look if you want. You have the old video and the basic code that made this behavior possible. So I decided to take this, and instead of working with the module level, the form code, how can we convert that into a class module that we can then implement on any form very easily? Instead of always having to copy all of this code every single time for every single form, how could we simply create a reusable class that we just have to initialize, and now that form would have all this functionality automatically? So that's what we're going to delve into today. Now, as you can see, I created a first run at an article on the subject, and I've broken it down here. We're talking about subclassing a form. Subclassing, what is subclassing? Well, a form module is actually, it's a class of its own, and we're going to create a class to that class. So that's why it's referred to as subclass. At least that's my understanding of things. So basically, I have to subclass the form. So we're going to create a form module. And because in this particular demonstration, what we're after is this whole saving mechanism, I'm using buttons, command buttons. Therefore, we also are going to end up creating a command button class module. Now, you can create modules for any type of control, text box, subforms, anything that's in Access, you can subclass it. It depends on what you need to do and achieve. But for today, we're talking about subclassing the form and then therefore also command buttons, because I need to add the different events for my save and cancel buttons. And lastly but not least, then we get to the form itself. And how do we initialize the class in a form so we can actually benefit from all this work we've just done? Towards the end of the article, then I start sprucing things up, adding some extra code to demonstrate that you can use the class to do all sorts of other things. Obviously, my objective here today is functionality. We're talking events, recreating the behavior and the functionality. But I wanted to illustrate that classes can do so much more. And they are truly very, very powerful tools. And I just wanted to highlight a little bit of what you can do to give you guys a little bit of an idea of where you can take some of this stuff. Don't think you're limited to just what I've demonstrated up here. As you can see below, we can take things much further. Okay, enough chit chat. Let's take a look at what we're talking about, how we get into this. Okay, so let's just refresh our memories for 2 quick seconds here. So based on my previous article, I showed you that we could achieve this, and that when you make a change, the buttons became enabled. If you didn't save, then they would be discarded. Your change would be discarded. It wouldn't be saved like Access normally does, and it was only committed when you actually press that save button. And I also set it up that we got a prompt if someone tried to close it prematurely, and that they at least wouldn't lose their work unless they chose to do so. Okay, so just to refresh our memories again, what did I do here? We ended up using 4 events at the form level. Then we also obviously had to do click events for each of the 2 buttons. So we're looking at 6 events here to make this behavior work. Now, I just want to demonstrate to you the final product, and then we're going to talk about how we moved from module code to class modules. So the end product, just for illustrative purposes, is this. And what I'm doing here is the back color here is controlled by the class. The button colors are controlled by the class. The boldness of the text on the buttons controlled by the class. And the entire behavior. The fact that when I make a change here, it unlocks these buttons, enables them, that's controlled by the class. Everything works as the previous version, but there is no code in the form itself. It's all driven by class modules. And like I say, we have the exact same behavior. Okay, how did I do this? Because if you look here very quickly, now in the form, I don't have current and before updates, and all I have is the open and the close. So what have I done exactly? Well, let's look at the form. The form is very simple. I'm creating a module level variable. I called it listener. You can call it anything you want. It makes no difference. But it is a new class. It's my class, my form class. And when I open the form, I'm initializing it. I'm setting the p form, which is the form property, to me, the current form that I'm in. So this guy here. And on close, I'm simply doing some cleanup. But that's it. So basically, I'm using the form open to initialize the class. That's it. With this little bit of code, I'm able to get all the behavior that all of this code previously took. And that's the power of class modules. Once you get your classes designed, you can then go and throw this code into any form, and now you've got that behavior that you wanted, and it's uniform, standardized, and it's centralized in a way that all you have to do, you want to change something, you just go to the proper class, make your little tweak there, and all the forms instantaneously have been updated. That's the power of class modules. Okay, so enough talking about this. We understand the basics here. What we're really here is, how did I take all of this and turn it into class modules? Well, as I've already mentioned, we're going to break this down into components. And the two components we're interested in is the form itself and then the command buttons. Now, the command buttons are part of the form, so we have to start with the form level. So let's look at that form class. Now, the form class, because we're wanting to add functionality events, we have to use the with events, okay? And then I declared my variable that I'm going to use throughout this class module, and obviously it's an access form. You're going to then see I create another variable, we're going to get to it, for the command button. Each command button is going to be part of this calling a class, the control command button class, which is this guy here. Then I have a general VBA collection for storing in this case, it's going to be my command button classes. And that's just so we don't accidentally have them disappear on us. It's just a way of retaining them to ensure that they remain in memory and active for us to be able to use. The form save record, well, it's the exact same one that was in the original form. But we need that. We need that functionality because we're using it in our different functions. So that needs to be available to us at the form level. So I have to recreate it here. Then I have this constant, which represents the event procedure. When you're in a form, remember this guy here, event procedure? Well, that's exactly what that constant represents. Because I'm going to need to assign it to different events. So those events actually get triggered. Now that we got the basic declarations out of the way, basically I'm going to do a get and a set with reference to the form that the class is being initiated on. Remember here, the p form, and we're setting listener p form to me. Well, what is that? We're doing a set of p form and we're passing me. The me is oMyForm, that's the variable that will receive it, and it's setting oForm, which is our class level variable with events. So basically I'm initializing the oForm with this declaration. So now oForm has been declared. So everywhere else in this code where you see O form, O form, O form, O form, well, it's always referring back to the my O form, which refers back to, obviously, the me. So the current form that is initiating the class. So that is the way we pass the form to the class so that it knows on what object to operate. And then part of this, I'm then doing my class initialization. There's different approaches here. This is the approach I'm using. Okay, you could also use the class initialize, different approaches. But here I've set my O form. Now I'm going to call my initialization routine. And there you have it. We're going to skip over this section just for the immediate, and we're going to come back to it because that's the command buttons. But let's keep concentrating on the form level. What have I done? Well, for illustrative purposes, I just wanted to demonstrate that, well, now you've got an instance of that form, you can do anything you want to that form. So I'm just demonstrating here, we can control different section heights, we can change back colors, you could change its positioning, you could disable the entire form, like you can do whatever you want, make it visible, invisible, the sky's the limit here. But I just wanted to illustrate some very basic things that, for instance, would allow you to ensure uniformity throughout your entire application. This is the color my client wants in the header sections of all the forms. Well, now with this initialization routine, you can make that happen in one place. And if he changes his mind and says, oh no, I've decided I don't like that color, well, you just switch it out for another color and boom, all the forms have been updated in one foul swoop. So just to show you how powerful this can be. So do a little bit of general formatting. And then down here, now I'm setting up the events. Now, what are these events? On current, after update, before update, on dirty. Those should be familiar to us because they are the original events from the module code. So I'm recreating these different events, but now I'm doing the class module. So I have to first declare them. And that's what that event procedure was about, remember? So I'm going to declare now that my form actually has these events. If you look at the form, they aren't there. But now, because I'm using a class module, I'm actually creating them through VBA at runtime. And once we get through that, I also create a class terminate, which is just doing house cleaning. Okay, so we've got the basics done. Now we have to look at, okay, we're saying that O form has an on current event, but we need to make that code appear somewhere because it isn't in the form, right? That's the whole point. We don't want it here. Well, that's what we do below. So I start here and you'll see we have O form, all right, after update. We have O form before update, O form current, O form dirty. And we have that module level procedure that we also need to add there. One little thing here that was a little trickier than what you may see in other bits of code. I also had to create a get and let property for our module level variable. Why? Because yes, here it isn't required, but we're going to need to change this value at the button level. Because if we remember here and we look at a button, we would change, if I find the save, where is it? Save. We change the value of that variable through the button. And because of that, I needed to expose that property so that I could call it and change it via the command button class. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. So I had to also create these two properties where I will pass the value I want to change it to, and that updates my module level variable from the child class, which is in this case the command button class. But the rest of this is all pretty standard. It's what we had here originally, except instead of using things like me, now I'm going to use things like, where is it? O form. Form that's initialized the entire class. So instead of me undo, I'm doing O form undo. And you just go through this O form, the command button enabled, O form command button enabled, true or false, etc. And that's it. So it's almost as simple as a copy paste of these different events, current, before update, dirty, into my class module for the form level. Except we do have to do a few little minor tweaks. Okay, that's done. We've done the form level events. We've got our form set up. And now we need to concentrate on the buttons. So I'm now going to have to create a class module with events, because once again, we're going to associate an event or events to each command button of interest. So we need with events. And I just created M command button as access command button. I create also, just found it easier to work this way, a module level representing the form. And I created a module level variable representing the class of the parent form. Then I have my initialization routine. And normally it would have just ended here. Okay, I pass it the form class, which then I associate to my variable. And then with that, I'm able to use the get to also get the form that it represents, that class represents, that class instance represents. That way now, in the rest of my code, I now have the form. This here was just to illustrate that once again, we can do all sorts of other things than just affect behavior. So for instance, I'm now coming here, checking the command button name, and I'm going to change some properties of it. So I'm going to change the back color and the weight of the text, the caption. So now I can make, my cancel button red, my save button green. I can make them blue. I can make them any color I want, because now all I have to do is change one value in one location. All my forms would update instantaneously. Per the form, I'm creating obviously a get and a set for the command button. And I create my class terminate, which just does the house cleaning. The last thing, obviously, it's a command button. I want to add the on-click event to it. Now, I'm going to create the on-click event back in my form, okay? But we still have to provide the code for it here. So this is why you'll see here the M command button click, right? So the M command button, which is our with events. So I create an M command button click. And here I'm using the M command button name to differentiate which button I'm processing. And then I'm able to go, okay, for my cancel button, you do this. For my save button, you do this. And you could add on as many as you want. Once again, like I said here, I was grabbing my parent class and using my parent class to determine the form. So now I have a form variable that then I'm able to use here and say, if my form is dirty, then undo it. If my form is dirty here, then save it. And as I mentioned previously, this was another thing that I had to do. I had to create, remember right here, my get and my set. Or should I say in this case, because it's Boolean, it's not a set, it's a let. I used the let to change my form level variable. And that's what happens right here. I'm using my parent class, which represents the form class. And then I use my let event where I'm changing the form level variable to true. So I end up using this guy in fact. So we understand the basics of it, but we still haven't actually tied this to the form itself. I've shown you the class module, shown you the functionality, but we have to come back up here to the section we skipped initially. And we have to look at this here. What am I doing? Well, I'm initializing my collection variable. We're going to store information into it just to keep them in memory so we don't have any issues of them just vanishing into thin air. Now I'm going to loop through every control on my form quickly, and I'm going to look at their type, and I'm going to, in this case, isolate those that are command buttons, because what we're after today are the cancel and save command buttons. Then I'm going to look at their name, and I'm going to say if it's my command button save or it's my command button cancel, because those are the only two things I'm interested in. Then now we start. We're going to start by initializing a variable O command button, which is a class, and we're going to create a new instance of the class control command button. Now we're going to associate to the, if we come back here, right here, the set command button, we're going to initiate and pass it this control because it was one of these two guys. We're going to initiate a new class and we're going to pass the control to it saying this button is part of that class. Initiate the class for that button. Now I'm going to also, so we've associated the command button to it. Now we're going to initialize our class. So it's going to run this code. So in fact, it's going to initiate our form variables and the rest of the code all works. And it's going to do the formatting for us automatically. Then I'm going to come here and this is where I add that on-click event. We had already created the event, but we hadn't actually associated it to a button yet. That's where this guy comes in. Here, I'm taking my O command button. I'm using the representation of the button that we just created. And I'm saying now the on-click is an event procedure. And then, like I said, the event procedure is all here. And then we come down, I add it to the collection for safekeeping, and I'm able to do a bit of spring cleaning. Then it comes through, it loops to the next control. And let's say it's the cancel this time. Well, it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to initiate a new class for the cancel button. It's going to associate the control, initialize it, associate the event procedure to it, and so on and so forth. You'll also see, just for fun, I added a case for labels where I changed the for color because I don't like the default label color that Microsoft uses. It's quite horrible. It's a pale gray and it is not very legible in my personal opinion. So I'm going to override all labels and make them black. So instead of having to go into design view for every single form and do this manually, I can now just do it right there with one line of code. Now any form that I use this class on will automatically have all the labels updated instantaneously. So as you can see, very powerful. And that, my friends, are the two class modules and how they're built up that the form now simply initializes with one line. With this one line, all of this is done for us. All of this is done for us. And the result, as you saw, is this. And just to demonstrate, you know, I'm not kidding around here. Let's come back here. I'm going to just demonstrate a couple things. Let's comment out my label, okay? So let's relaunch it for 2 seconds. You see how the labels here are grayish, right? Okay. Come back here. Let's return this back to the way it was. Now look at the labels. Now they're black. I haven't changed my form design in any manner, but from one entry in my class module, all the labels instantaneously updated. Similarly, let's look at our command button for a second. And let's say the cancel, I don't want it to be as bold for whatever reason. So let's go to the extreme. Let's make it thin. So I changed one entry. Let's make it visible so then we can clearly see the difference. And I know it may be a little hard to see on the screen, but this is distinctly a smaller writing or a thinner writing than the save. And you can go about doing any change to any property that you would conventionally be able to do normally through, what you do here, right? You can call up any command button and you can access all of these properties and change any which one you want. Well, you can do the exact same thing in your class module. I just use the back color, the front color, but you can come here and you can decide, okay, now I need to do something else. And you can pick and choose and use any of these properties you want and change them in any way you want. But now you're doing it for the class module, so it's going to affect any of those command buttons that you've tied to this class module. But that's the beauty. Everything is centralized now, so instead of having to go form to form to form to form, now you can just come in one class module and update it here, and it will shoot out to all of your forms. And you can then also, as you saw, break things down. And if you want to control things differently for different buttons, well, you can create a case statement here. If you want to create things and control them for different forms, well, you can do the same thing because you have the instance of the form here. So if you wanted to do another case statement and do a check here for if it's this form, I want that. If it's another form, it's an exception, then you can do that. You can also do the same thing here where you could check what form I am in, and in the initialization, you could change the behavior. You could change what's being called. You could technically, not something I'd ever recommend, but you could have different class modules for command buttons, and depending on the form, call the different class modules. So instead of here being this one, you could have another one. It could be number 2 for one specific form. So you can really customize it. They're truly very powerful tool, class modules, and they allow you a lot of things. The one thing you have to be aware of, as you see, especially when you're new to this, is it adds a whole new layer of abstraction, and it can become a little confusing at first, especially this section here where you're trying to understand, whoa, what's happening here with the command button. Okay, you have to understand that now it has to create its own or initialize its own class module for each button. So it adds this extra layer, and it can be confusing to new developers. It can be confusing possibly to people that take over your work down the road. But at the same time, it is a very smart way of working. It's, like I said, it centralizes and standardizes things very quickly and easily. And as you can see, it's very easy to implement once you get this framework built up. And it also simplifies development in the sense that, let's say now you want to add a new property that you want to control. You want to come in here and you want to change the fore color, you want to change the picture, you want to change whatever you want. Well, now you just come here to do it in one location instead of having to go and edit 4 different forms. So that's basically a summary of taking a module level code and converting it over to subclass classes that we then call and use and implement in our form. I do hope this has been somewhat informative and helps a few of you understand how some of this all goes together. I know it can be a little confusing at first, but once you look at the code, you work through it once or twice, you'll see there's logic behind it. But it is a little bit difficult to grasp the first run through. So take your time, go through it more than once until you really understand how all of this is looped together. The code I have on my site currently is the simplified version. As you can see, I don't have the formatting in here. I don't have the formatting for the command button. I did that on purpose, was to keep the initial example very simple and not add extra stuff initially. But having the formatting, being able to do this type of thing, being able to do this type of code in one place is extremely powerful, and you don't want to overlook it. If you're going to go down the route of doing class modules, then you want to get into this. I promise you, you want to get into this. But I don't want to confuse the matter initially on my website. Probably a good idea. I should probably add a more detailed section here and give a complete new class modules with all of the code instead of just this excerpt. But just to illustrate the power of class modules in subclassing forms, and you can do this obviously with reports as well. The same general concept applies. I'll leave it there. We will see you in the next video. As always, like, share, subscribe. Anything you can do to promote my channel is greatly appreciated. And we will see you in the next video.